What's good? It's NasaTube, and I like to create builds. Not necessarily the best min-max builds per se, but ones that I think are fun, or at least interesting. The idea with the series is just to help people with the thinking that goes into making builds, so that they can create fun builds for themselves. So whether you're a beginner looking for builds to do, or a veteran looking for new ideas, you've come to the right place. Today we're looking at the ThunderCats build for Wisp, and it's a build that's focused on armor stripping in large areas as well as crowd control. Let's get right into it. Before we get into the mod loadout, there are a couple of interesting mechanics / interactions that I need to go over that make this whole thing possible. So first of all, we need Desiccation. It's a subsumable ability from Inaros, and we also need its Augment. And what this augment allows you to do is whenever you're killing a blinded enemy with a finisher, it has a 100% chance to summon a Swarm Kavat, and that Swarm Kavat can spread a status called Scarab Swarm. The Scarab Swarm is basically just a corrosive proc that happens every 0.5 seconds, and this is what will allow us to armor strip. The way that these Swarm Kavats apply the Scarab Swarm is through damage that they have dealt. Normally, this pretty much just amounts to their auto attacks. In other words, very, very slowly. Maybe once every like 2-3 seconds. However, if a Kavat is carrying a shock mote, anything that the shock mote would be affecting, it will also be receiving the Scarab Swarm debuff. So what ends up happening is it runs into a crowd of enemies. It will at least target 5 of them to have the Scarab Swarm debuff. They start getting stripped. If you have more than one cat, you are going to apply this debuff to basically everything around you. A second thing to note about the Scarab Swarm is that it's locking everything down. So it's another crowd control effect, I guess on top of the electric status that comes from the shock motes. And I guess also Breach Surge, which is another form of crowd control. Long story short, you will have a lot of crowd control rolling around as long as they're not Eximus units, they'll have some sort of Overguard. Overguard, I will say, is particularly dangerous for this build for a few reasons, as Desiccation can't affect Overguarded units, which means you can't really get the ball rolling if there is a lot of Overguard around you or a unit that provides Overguard to the units around it. Another thing I have to go over is that Desiccation can't be subsumed over your 4, which would be preferable, as Will-O-Wisp is probably a better utility spell to have than Soulgate. However, Desiccation's Curse will only allow a maximum of 2 Swarm Kavats. If you were to just subsume Desiccation over the 1, 2, and 3, you will end up getting the full 5 Swarm Kavats you're supposed to get. It's just I'm assuming some sort of spaghetti code in regards to Desiccation's Curse checking for the 4, but if Desiccation's on 4, then yeah, you only get the 2, so just as a heads up. I also have to mention that this is an Arcane Persistence build, which, I'm not going to lie, it's just been my jam recently, and I've been trying to make this work on a bunch of different frames. But if you don't know what Arcane Persistence does, it removes all shields, and if armor is above 700, you can't be hit for more than 500 damage a second. And the only things that can disable this protection is magnetic status and ability nullifying effects, so nullifier bubbles or violence. If you're looking at my armor, you may notice I don't have 700 armor, and you're probably thinking, well, what's the deal with that? That brings us to our second arcane, and that being Arcane Ultimatum, which, on finished kill, it grants you 1200 armor for 45 seconds. So you're probably seeing how this all comes together. We desiccate an enemy, we finish them with Desiccation's Curse, giving us some Swarm Kavats, which also activates our Arcane Ultimatum, giving us the armor for Arcane Persistence to also work. The Swarm Kavats only last about 20 to 25 seconds, so as long as there are Kavats on the field, Arcane Ultimatum should also be running. Finally, we can get into what the mod loadout is, and as you can see by my ability stats, it is mostly strength. We have Blind Rage, we have Transient Fortitude, we have Archon Intensify, I will get into this in a second, and also Augur Secrets, as well as Power Drift, just all adding to the strength. So the main reason why we're going such high ability strength is mostly for the vitality mode. It gives us more max health. With everything rolling, we end up with about 2,000 health, which gives us about 4 seconds before we die. If you also include the health per second you get, I think it's about 5-ish seconds. So in short, it's just more about giving us a longer grace period. The other effect that ability strength has on this build is Breach Surge, which just increases the damage multiplier as well as the status chance. Going back to Archon Intensify, the way Archon Intensify works, if you don't know, it gives you 30% ability strength, which is very much just like base Intensify, but restoring health with abilities gives you another 30% ability strength for 10 seconds. What I initially thought would be the case is when you get regen from the vitality mode, you would be getting that extra 30%, which means you just have a constant 60% ability strength, but that's not at all how this works, unfortunately, and this makes this whole usage of Archon Intensify a little more tricky. And we'll get into why Archon Intensify is a little tricky later in the video. Next, we have Energy Nexus, which is just a passive 3 energy per second regen. I was trying Archon Stretch, but if you don't know, Archon Stretch gives you 45% ability range, and abilities that deal electricity damage will restore 2 energy per second over 5 seconds, which is great. The second part always works. You've basically got a constant 2 energy per second. The problem is 45% ability range means you're starting to crowd control enemies that are very far away from you. It makes tempo terrible, if I'm being perfectly honest. What else do we have here? We have the Aura slot. So the Aura slot, I think, is honestly whatever you feel. I just went with more melee damage because it made finishing damage a little bit, just a slight bit more comfy. And also we are running with a Fused Reservoir. This is another like flexible slot, so throw whatever you like here. I just did this so it saves me having to throw down all of the motes, since you are going to be actually using all of the motes. But yeah. And here we have the Archon Shard loadout that I'm rolling with this build. The only mandatory one I would say that you need is the Emerald Archon Shard that increases the max stacks of corrosive status by 3 in the case of Talforge, but if you're not rolling with a Talforge Emerald Archon Shard, you're having issues with that, just run with 2 normal Emerald Archon Shards and that will do pretty much the same, actually a little better than what a single Talforge will do. 2 of the Emerald Archon Shards together will completely strip, but 1 Talforge gives you 98% armor strip, so just to keep in mind. But the rest of the Archon Shards, you can roll with whatever you like. I've obviously gone for a lot of ability strength just to have a more health on the mote as well as more regen, and just a casting speed one because throwing down motes in a pinch can sometimes be the difference between life and death. We're going to be getting into what weapons we're going to be using for this build, and I shall talk about them based off what their functionality is rather than the weapon itself, except for the Velox, but we'll get into that later. The Coda Bubonico, however you pronounce it, it is my primer, purely just a primer. The Velox we'll get into in the mod loadout section, and the Harmony. So the Harmony, you can basically just pick any weapon that's a pretty good heavy attacking weapon, so that's like things like Court Assist or Sancti Magister. And here is the mod loadout for the Coda Bubonico. It's my priming weapon, so we're going to be prioritizing status chance and multi-shot. But basically we're going to be running with as many 60-60 mods as you can. I don't have the electricity 60-60 mod, so I'm just running with Charged Shell. We also have the multi-shot in the form of Hell's Chamber and Vigilante Armaments. And since I like seeing a lot more status effects here, I just went with Magnetic Strafe and Atomic Fallout. And also with Atomic Fallout, it's 40% magazine capacity, and with weapons that function like the Coda Bubonico, it's really nice. It is a really nice thing to have. The arcane that I've chosen to run with for this weapon is Primary Debilitate. If you don't know what that is, if an enemy has 10 stacks of a combined status effect, inflicting the same status effect again has a 100% chance of inflicting one of the base status effects it's composed of. What that would mean is if I had 10 stacks of radiation on an enemy already, then if I apply radiation again, it will also apply either fire or electricity. And I do have to mention, to make more use out of this arcane, it would probably make more sense if you didn't roll with so many status effects, because the chance of hitting the 10 status effects is not the best. But I will also say corrosive will be stacked up on enemies. So if you happen to hit them with a corrosive status effect, you have a chance of adding another different element, another different status effect on top, and this will come in handy for condition overload. One thing I do need to mention before moving on to the next weapon is we're going to be only using the alternate fire on this weapon, as it shoots out viral explosions that will help with priming. And here is our mod loadout for the secondary, the Velox, well in my case it's Velox Prime. But it actually doesn't matter if you use the Prime or the normal Velox. You're going to be using it purely for this mod. On hit, you gain 0.6 ability strength up to 60% maximum consumed on your next ability cast. And we're going to be using this to snapshot a 60% ability strength buff on our motes, so our motes are stronger. And as such, we're going to be going for pretty much fire rate. So it is and multi-shot. So most of this stuff here is fire rate and multi-shot. So there are a couple of mods that we have here that aren't related to fire rate or multi-shot, and one being the Karna Stinger, which is a part of the Karna set. And what this does is whenever you kill an enemy with a heavy attack, it reduces enemy accuracy against you by 20% and also grants immunity to status effects for 4 seconds. And the reason why this is important is that the arcane persistence, the arcane called arcane persistence, I should say, can only be shut down by magnetic procs and ability nullifying effects. So now we don't have to worry about magnetic procs as long as we're killing with heavy attacks. And we're also running with steady hands, which reduces the weapon recoil by 60%. And when you have this much fire rate on this weapon, having reduced weapon recoil is a lifesaver. And also for the arcane, we're running with secondary merciless, and the only reason why we're running with this is purely for the reload speed. And finally we get to the melee weapon section of our build, and I've gone with the Harmony as it's a very strong heavy attack weapon. And if you don't know what this weapon does, it has a unique trait. All heavy attacks condense all status effects that deal damage over time into a single instance. So if you're dealing toxin or heat or electricity, it will condense all of the dot damage into a single nuke. And also heavy attack kills activate harmonic resonance, a buff that increases status duration by 30% for all allies. This also increases the amount of damage that this weapon will do when you do heavy attacks. So with that in mind, we are rolling with Amalgam Organ Shatter, which is just more critical damage and heavy attack wind-up speed. We're also rolling with Melee Elementalist, which increases the amount of damage that the statuses will be doing, which in turn will be increasing the amount of damage the heavy attacks will be doing. And also, again, increases the wind-up speed for the heavy attacks. Prime Reach is just a comfy one. I don't know if you necessarily need it, but I like to run Prime Reach with a lot of my melee builds. It just makes things a little easier. And here we run with the other part of the Karna's set, and this one being Karna's Mandible, so we know why this is here. It also increases slash and 60% status chance, which is nice. We're also running with Galvanized Reflex, and this just allows us to have initial combo whenever we get kills. So you kill one person with a heavy attack, you're going to be starting at plus 20 initial combo, which gives you a 2x multiplier on your damage. This goes up, but I'm not going to lie, you attack so quickly with the heavy attack that you are not going to get more than the 2x multiplier unless you give it time for it to build up. We're also running with Killing Blow, which just increases melee damage on heavy attacks and increasing the wind-up speed again. Here we have Condition Overload, which does 80% increased melee damage per status type affecting the target. So if you've got 3 different statuses rolling on it, then you have 240% increased damage. I'm running this one specifically because if I was to run, say, Primed Pressure Point, run into problems where I can't do finishing attacks that kill the opponent unless they're kind of like halfway or lower. So what this does is if I prime the enemy with like say 4 different status effects, then I do a finishing attack, it will definitely kill them. But yeah, that's why this is here, and that's why I've got a primer as well. It's purely for the whole finishing attack aspect of the build. And lastly, we have Lasting Sting. And this might be one of the few weapons that takes advantage of this in a very nuke-focused way, I guess. So increasing the status duration will then increase the amount of damage that the dots will do eventually, but that gets all condensed into a single instance, so that just increases the damage of your heavy attacks by actually quite a large margin. And also the arcane we're running with is Melee Afflictions. And what this does is every time you do a knockdown or they're flung by melee attacks, they get 6 additional stacks of status effects on them. And this again will just be increasing the damage of those heavy attacks if they have, say, Slash or Toxin or whatever damage over time status effects there are. And I also do need to mention that the Harmony, or I should say Scythe weapons, inflict guaranteed proc of Slash on heavy attacks. So for our focus school, we're running with Madurai, and there's only one reason why I'm even running with it at all. It has a sling strength buff that you can get, and all it does is when you do chain slings, you get 40% ability strength for 20 seconds. So yeah, it's purely for another snapshot, that's it. So for companions, I'm running with the Kavat, specifically the Idaza one. You can run whatever you like. This is purely for thematic reasons why I'm even picking this. I just love seeing a bunch of cats on the field. So the only 2 mods I really want to highlight with the Kavat that I have is the Duplex Bond. So this will just allow your companion to be able to clone itself every time you expend 100 energy, and it's up to 3 clones. Just more cats on the field, more hilarity. And also Territorial Aggression, which just has more cats happen. Yeah, so you just end up with quite a lot of cats on the field, and it's pretty funny to see. Now we can get into how you actually play this build, and main goal initially is to get Arcane Persistence online. So you have to prime enemies and then hit them with a Desiccation, which opens them up to finishes, kill them with a finisher, and then your Arcane Ultimatum comes online, which then in turn allows the Arcane Persistence to come online. So we'll just do that real quick. So there we go. Now we have Arcane Persistence online at the top right, which is the 500. Now earlier I did mention that Archon Intensify is a little bit tricky to use. So normally it gets activated when you get healed. The only way this can happen on Wisp is when you first place down a moat. As you can see, we have 30% strength buff at the top right. But what you may notice once that buff runs out, that being under the effects of the regen doesn't do anything on its own. You actually have to be actively regenning health for that to work. So I'll just quickly clear the enemies. Oh, kill the enemy, sorry. Unpause the AI. Simulate, okay. So now, you see, as soon as I got shot, it immediately came up because I started regenerating. But also, as you can see, without Persistence online, you get melted really fast. Now that we've gone over the, I guess, intricacies of Archon Intensify, we can get into how we actually snapshot all of the ability strength, and this is, I guess, the most intensive part of this build. And so we want to place down a moat, then we load them up with the Velox. After loading them up with the Velox, we switch into our Operator and we do a Sling twice. And that gives us all of the buffs, and then we finally place down all of our moats. So, bam, load them up. So we've got the 60% there, double sling, switch back, place it down. And then we end up with 2.2k health. So once you've got your moat set up, then you just want to keep your Arcane Persistence active as much as possible, as well as Kavats on the field. So in this case I don't have either, so I'm just going to prime them. Oh. And then, yeah. Then it just turns into breach surging and spamming heavy attack. And you'll see at the top right, we also have the Karna set active. Oh, everything's already dead, so... yeah, it's a pretty easy to play build, but it is pretty active because you do need to keep these buffs rolling. If it ever, like, persistence falls and you're under fire, you are probably almost near instantly dead. Especially, depending on what level you're on. If you're on anything under Steel Path, it won't even be an issue at all. But if you're on Steel Path and higher, then yeah, these buffs running out, you will instantly die. I do also have to mention that ability nullifiers, the nullifier bubbles, the dudes that run around with the nullifier bubble, they do destroy moats. So sometimes you do need to set back up again mid-mission, which can be kind of scary. That about wraps it up. If there's any suggestions or tweaks to the build, please let me know in the comments. And I would also love to hear the kind of builds you guys have been using for, I guess, summoning a bunch of cats, even if it's not using any of what I showcased here. If I see some builds that look fun or interesting, I'll make a video about it in the future. Thanks for tuning in. GG's and have fun out there.